Shyvee Shi, welcome to the Workout. I'm so great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Our podcast is all about careers, and you are a fellow product manager. So I want to talk to you about your product management career journey. But before we get into all kind of the details, why don't you tell us more about what you're doing these days?
Thank you so much for having me again. Career is always top of mind for many people, and many people I talk to as well, like friends, colleagues, and everybody alike in the audience who are listening to this podcast. So happy to chat about that. What I'm doing these days, a lot of stuff. So today, these days, I'm in charge of a huge horizontal project at LinkedIn, where we try to make LinkedIn more relevant for people who are not already using LinkedIn. So to kind of unlock new areas of growth. So if you think about, different industries or segments of users, maybe international groups that haven't really been using LinkedIn as often, people like healthcare professionals, like nurses, doctors, they could be leveraging LinkedIn more. Why not? They're a very important economic pillar, right? For many reasons. Teachers, who could have benefited a lot from our products, but they aren't using it as much. So we wanted to unlock new waves of growth by making our product more relevant to help them creating value for them. So kind of thinking through different parts of the product experience that can make LinkedIn better for them, leveraging different type of technologies and just, figure out how to customize LinkedIn in a way that can be relevant for more audiences. And then I think outside of work, which is also important, right? Giving a whole person perspective. I'm really interested in the nerdy side of me is really interesting in learning about generative AI these days. I'm talking to a lot of product managers. I try to build our series, sharing some thought leadership, but it's going pretty slow there, to be quite frank, just because too many balls to juggle. But on the very personal front, I'm learning how to play golf and continue to improve my pickleball games. So those are the non-work stuff, just to round it out a little bit.
There's quite a few things, and I think you clearly show that you have a very diverse set of interests. And we'll get to the golf part too. I'm curious kind of how you find the magical time in doing everything, because time is such a limited resource. But I want to start with your kind of origin story, right? So you are very clearly an experienced veteran product manager, but what did it start? Like, what was that pivotal moment in which you're like, yes, I want to do PM. That's my thing.
Yeah, it's actually not obvious. In retrospect, this is like, if I have one life regret is I wish I committed to this path sooner. So my story started early on, about a decade ago. I probably look older than I'm actually than I am. Sorry, I mean, I look younger than I actually am. Friday afternoon, that's the problem. So my career started about a decade ago in consulting, where I work on different, industries, over 12 different industries across healthcare, nonprofit, financial services, telecommunication, you name it, retail, to help them use technology to disrupt their business. But a lot of the customers or clients that I serve are not like the Amazon, the technology digital native companies, right? So they struggle with understanding technology. So back then, there's no such thing, or it wasn't formally called product management. So I was doing a lot of, sort of change management work, or digital strategy, launching proof of concept, building prototypes and testing concept, but it was never called like product management. So I just do a lot of those projects, which I enjoy. But at the time, I thought my superpower, since I'm not a technical person, was creating PowerPoint slides, doing storytelling, and just be really, happy with that. So there are moments where I thought about pursuing product management during business school, graduate school, for example. I talked to two of the former sort of product manager interns at school to sort of explore this path. But at the time, I got some mixed signals around the scope of their work compared to the work that I would have been doing had I been in a consulting sort of agency capacity, right? So I doubted myself. Some of the key learnings I learned from that whole experience was, you don't just talk to two people. Even in user research, the magic number is 5 to 6. So I think I should have definitely diversified sort of where I seek inputs and perspectives, right? So I think for a long time, probably 3 or 4 years, it was me feeling like I have this interest in building stuff, but then I wasn't sure if that's product management or something else. And then I just like didn't quite double down. And then shortly after I moved to San Francisco, which was back in 2016, was when I started to, go and I went to a lot of meetups and started seeing more and more PMs and entrepreneurs and founders and having conversation and understand a little bit more about product management. You're also at the heart of Silicon Valley, so then it's easier to kind of learn what's going on in that space. So then I realized, wow, this is really what I wanted to do. But then at that point, I think product management is already a very popular, field, right? So a lot of people want to go in. But yeah, the moment I have the conviction that I love solving problem, I love the user psychology to learn like why people doing things the way they do. It enacts sort of the detective side of me that I love to dig in to understand the problem, understanding the why, working with engineers, gain more confidence working with engineers and designers, having the end-to-end ownership of seeing things through, not just putting it on a slide and presenting a recommendation and kind of move on from there. I enjoy that. But I definitely think that it was sort of a back and forth process to gain that conviction. So my learning there to anybody who's aspired to become a product manager, I think it's just get more data points around like understanding what that path entail. And then commit to it earlier if you feel like that's the path you want to go down, or seek more opportunities to get exposure to work on side projects, building your stuff. And so that was the key learning for me.
It feels like a very natural transition from kind of consulting to product management. But are there any particular areas that I'd say excite you the most about shaping and driving product strategy? Because if we're looking at kind of the current technological landscape, like we talked about generative AI shortly before this recording, but it moves so fast, right? Like you always have to be on top of quite a few things. Like, is there anything that stands out to you that are like, this is my favorite thing to be doing?
Yeah, it's funny because yes and no. I will give you the yes part. I think there are a couple of things that I really enjoy about a product. One is sort of the first principle thinking, the critical thinking aspect of product management and how well-rounded it is as a discipline. Like, right, like understanding what problem you're trying to solve, why does that problem matter, to the users, and how are you going to solve it? Because in so many of our career, I think a lot of times, especially early on in your career, you're given a problem, very well-defined problem. And so you're a great executor to figure out solutions to solve that problem. But in product management space, you actually have to take a step back. The good PMs just solve the problem. The great PMs would take a step back and like, wait a second, is that the right problem to solve? Is that the right way of thinking about that problem? How should I frame it differently? So I think it's both a very challenging intellectual exercise, but it's also really, really critical. So I really enjoy doing that. The other aspect is where sort of the empathy comes in. I really enjoy, I think my superpower is actually product discovery. So really understanding the psychology, really trying to be in that moment as the user, noticing the little things, the unconscious biases that might persist in their, perceiving your product and why they use or not use your product in certain instances. So Competing Against Luck, which is this book about a job to be done framework, is one of my favorites. But I also study a lot of like user psychology. Some of the books such as Dan Ariely's Unpredictably Irrational. And another one is Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. Those are really, really good classics and like, the design of everyday things around those little nuance, around how people make decisions. And so being able to see them live, I think it's a very interesting and motivating things. I think the last aspect I like about product is sort of you mentioned about generative AI. There's so much changing every day. It's really hard to keep up. Like I quite honestly, I'm probably not always up to date with a lot of the things that are going on, but just the excitement of like there's potentials here. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot of smart people. I think that also motivated me to feel like, life is a little bit unpredictable. It's quite exciting. There's a lot of new possibilities. So yeah, being at the heart of it, having conversations with people who are driving, taking charge of this new paradigm shift, is very exciting for me.
And on the topic of generative AI, now that we kind of reached the very important topic that I think is on a lot of folks' mind these days, and especially product manager, is AI is going to automate our jobs, right? And when people look at generative AI, that it can produce, ChatGPT produces you a lot of like text, material. There's tools like Stable Diffusion and Midjourney that can produce like imagery that's very hard to, discern from like photography things that is kind of scary, right? And kind of scary for a lot of folks in a lot of domains. And I had some conversations with product managers, and they're like, well, if you give it like 5 to 10 years, I think like large chunks of our jobs are going to be automated too, because like just toss some prompt into ChatGPT and give me a spec for this new feature based on the data that sits somewhere in some data store somewhere. What's the job of a PM, right? How do you see that evolving? How do you see what are the things that we should be paying attention to as PMs in this era of very, very fast-paced change, especially when it comes to automation?
I think first, let's talk about mindset. I think that I always wanted to start with why, right? Like start with the mindset, and everything else I think will naturally fall into place once you embrace the right mindset. I think AI is coming. There's no doubts about it. Yes, the technology might not be completely mature. So some people play with it and say, oh, it's not there yet. Or some people get like super scared of like, hey, I'm going to be like out of job in 3 to 5 years. I think those are valid concerns. But the right attitude and the right mindset in my mind is being a co-pilot, right? With AI. The analogy I like to use is coach and player. So if you remember watching this movie a couple years ago, King Richard, which was Serena and Venus, the tennis player's father, Richard Williams, how he coached his daughters playing in the field. He's not a world-class tennis player. His daughters are, right? But the idea is being a coach means you know how to give instructions to an AI, right? You know how to teach the AI to do things you want. And then you want to see the outcome coming into play. But then AI is actually the player, meaning you sort of have this tango in place, right? Where you help each other, but the player is the one, you acknowledge that the player is the one who's going to be better than you to doing the job. So I think that's the key, because in many ways, AI just have better memories, better computation powers, but you are the one who are at the driver's seat who's teaching the AI, what to perform. So I think having that mindset to be able to acknowledge that AI is going to do certain jobs better than you, but how are you going to instruct the AI to do? I think that's the $1 million skill set, like prompt engineering or understanding how you interact with AI. And then the second aspect, recently I had this conversation with a product leader, and then he told me, the divergent convergent prototype design thinking triangle, right? So in many ways, humans are really good at convergent thinking, meaning making judgments, making decisions based on a set of outputs. But what we are really bad at is, for example, having a lot of capacity to do a lot of discoveries, do a lot of idea generation. We often infuse a lot of biases in how we are doing our interview. We have preconceived notions. So we have confirmation biases. If someone said something that resonated with us, then it's going to make us feel like, oh yeah, this is what users said. But then if they say something else that doesn't make sense for us, we're either ignoring it or intentionally undermining that evidence, right? So, but AI without emotion can do that much better to present a more objective point of view and different, perspectives, and try to debate and contrast and helping us do that work. So I think the role that we're playing there, besides a coach, is having this kind of judgment, allowing us to free our creativity, amplifying our capability to do more. Like, for example, in the past, if I want to create a little short movie, I do not have the skill to actually produce that, right? Now, but now with AI, in a couple of years or maybe in a couple of months, we will be able to do that with just writing the text or giving some prompt. And so I think in many ways, yes, it's automating sort of the hard or boring part of our job. But in many ways, I think if you continue to embrace it and educate yourself, you are still very much in a driver's seat. And I also love to encourage people to think about what that would mean for future of work. Maybe it means that we don't have to work 5 days a week. Maybe we work 3 to 4 days a week because we're all becoming much more productive. Also, that might also mean that we finally get to tackle really, really hard problems like climate change, like poverty, right? These are the problem right now that only people like Bill Gates have the mental capacity to really solve, because everyone else is like, well, I'm worried about my job security, right? Like that kind of thing. So it maybe free us more capacity to think about those harder problems, and how do we infuse like more ethical principles into elevating humanity together. So I have a lot of optimism in many of this. I do see the risk of like people constantly feel like their skill set are outdated because AI learns faster than us, and it creates a lot more stress. There's a lot of talks around like universal basic income. Is that the solution? But I think in many ways, PM's the skill set of a product manager, right? Identifying the right problem to solve, making prioritization calls around, if that's the right problem to solve, communicating those results, motivating the team. I think bringing the pieces together, being the connective tissues. I do not see AI replacing us in that regard. AI might help us automate some of the more boring mundane aspects like bug bash or writing tests, like PRDs. So I wanted to embrace it and see how, what we are going with this. I think the more smart people putting their energy to figure out how AI can work for the better, I think the better the society will become versus just a technology nightmare.
Which is a nice segue to kind of the next question that popped into my mind as we talked about this is, as we think about jobs changing because of kind of the advent of AI, and not just generative AI, but like any kind of AI, realistically, do you see specifically for product managers any kind of, I want to call it like a career moat, something that sets you apart from everyone else, that even though the bulk, like you said, one of the kind of the ground truths for a lot of product management is that there's a lot of PMs, as you described, that do a lot of kind of I don't want to say it like it's not necessarily low value work. Like all work has value, but it's more like, hey, let's like triage bugs and like write a spec for the like nth time, right? Like a lot of that stuff will eventually kind of go away because you will not need it given kind of specific insights and specific formats for getting those insights. But is there anything that PMs can focus on today that can help them establish this kind of career moat, that despite the changes in technology, despite this fast-paced evolution, they can have the job security, they can have their career progression moving forward, right? Because it's hard to predict. I fully recognize the fact that like we don't have the magic 8 ball that we can look and ask like what's going to be in the next 10 years. Like next month is going to be probably different than what we have now. Nonetheless, are there any kind of robust, more kind of time-tested skills that you think are going to be more valuable down the line that folks can focus on today?
I think probably 3 skills top of mind. I think the first skill is really your ability to learn fast, right? Like, regardless your background, right? Like, how do you consume? Where do you consume, let's say, the latest information? And how do you get really good at it fast, despite there's a lot of things, moving parts? That could come at like being really good at maybe asking GPT to teach you stuff or AI to teach you stuff, right? Like it's the little hacks to make you a fast learner and constantly being this sponge to absorb and be able to translate, what you learn to what you can apply every day. So that means if right now you're working on sort of the plumbing work, and then overnight or over time, like AI is going to pick up some of that work, that means you're ready to take a more value added space. So the pro, the promising side of AI, I think, is to free your time so that you don't have to do so much plumbing work, that you can actually focus on the vision, right? So then when that time comes, you're ready to take on those opportunities. So I think that's number one. It's like, be a really fast learner. How do you have those habits to keep up with what's happening, right? I think the second aspect is going to be investing in the relationships, right? Whether it's within your company, people or thought leaders outside of your company, so that those are the things that AI will not replace, right? How do you build those relationships, cultivate them, and then embrace sort of a first principle thinking? Those are the things that that help you to challenge the output from an AI. So, for example, a lot of times people think that, oh, AI can just help us write essay. So in the future, people's reading and writing comprehension will just not be as sharp because AI can just do all of that for you. But then you need to start to think about critically, what does that mean for society as a whole? So, for example, if everything we consume and read is all going to be AI generated and that fit into the training loop, then you're just going to be in this like sort of really close chamber of like everything's AI written and reinforcing whatever beliefs and biases that's already entrenched in all those, AI conversation and the training data. So how do you break that, right? Like questions like that, like you need to be able to train yourself to start thinking and acting and learning that way. In addition to like, and how do you learn that? Like that's part of building the relationship and building the habit to like find the right person, the right connection to talk to, and then building it that way. I think the last piece is really, again, coming back to mindset, embracing this permanent beta kind of resilience. So it's never going to end, right? Like I think you have to learn how to embrace this uncertainty, this fast pace. It doesn't mean you have to be always on, like people will burn out if that's always the case, right? But I remember um, liz Liz and Molly are two creators that are like experts in emotions at work. They create those little emotion, like arts that people love. You think of your career that goes down like this, right? You know, um, like a curve that goes up and very smooth. But in reality, you're probably going up and down. And a lot of times you need to take some, breaks in between, like climbing up a stair. To go up your career. But a lot of times people tend to overestimate what they can achieve in a year, but underestimate what they can achieve in 10 years. So I think the essence there is that you can be, impatient with yourself for a near-term action, but you need to be patient and playing the long game. And that also require you to be in this permanent beta that you never like just coasting, you wanted to be able to learn and disrupt and constantly disrupt, reevaluate your priorities. Are you focusing on the right thing? Reinventing yourself every few months or every few years. Have those checkpoints with yourself and set up sort of like a tripwire, right? To understand, oh, am I falling behind what I want myself to do? Or am I enjoying what I'm doing? Am I learning? Am I growing? And I'm having fun with the people that I care about learning, right? So set up those moments to reflect. I think those are some of the key skills that someone needs to master.
Something you alluded to that I want to kind of get a deeper explanation from you is the value of creativity, right? Like as product managers, as engineers, as anyone else working kind of the tech field and even outside the tech field, one of the key differentiators is being able to come up with creative solutions to different problems, right? Like we're not talking about creativity as in like you can draw, but more like you can creatively think out of the box about a specific solution. And you're absolutely right, right? Like if you're feeding a model the same data over and over again, and then it's kind of becomes a self-reinforcing loop, you don't really get many creative solutions. It becomes very cookie cutter. Like everything is going to look the same. Every product is going to act the same way. It's all going to be templatized. Like that sounds like a boring future to live in. How do you feel about PMs kind of focusing on developing those creative skills, like creative problem solving skills, creative user interview skills? Where do you see that going?
there's a couple cheap ways that you can do it, and then there's a more sort of foundational skill set. I think the foundational skill set are things like you might just have to broaden your horizon, like your reading, right? Don't just consume from a single source, but doing it for consuming it from multiple point of view. The easier way, actually, I think you can ask AI to help you to become more creative. So a couple of ideas. For example, when you have a solution, you can ask the AI, hey, give me 5 or 10 contrasting point of view or different perspective, non-obvious insight that I might need to consider. So then you can kind of force yourself in that habit load of like considering different point of view. Other times it could be involving stakeholders that come from different backgrounds, right? To help you debate, creating that healthy tension between like the pros and cons of a different solution before you like settle on. I think some other tricks that I've seen working for teams where like you can also ask, AI to help you in the prompt as in like, hey, assuming if you're playing the different type of roles, assign them 10 different roles that are likely having different perspective, ask it to create a debate with you based on your idea or your problem to kind of broaden your point of view. So I think there's like multiple ways to kind of train yourself to be creative in that way by consisting like multiple point of views, contrasting point of views, by having creative exercise. Like for example, if you were Steve Jobs or Elon Musk, how would you solve this problem? So thinking big, like dropping certain constraints, right? Like if these technology constraints were not a problem, how would we do it differently? Now adding constraints like, hey, if this solution takes 3 years, what can we do in 6 months? Like, what are the options? Do we open up new options? So I think there's like thinking exercise you can do with the team and yourself to kind of like force yourself to create those habits of like thinking creatively and thinking about, what is beyond the obvious solution.
And on kind of the topic of creative thinking, one of the tangential areas to product management, and this is something that I think a lot of our listeners are curious about, that came up actually as a question right before the recording when I was talking to somebody, and they're like, hey, if you're a product manager, you always have these kind of piece of advice floating around online and different communities of like, oh, you have to use this framework and this framework and this framework to think about this. And that feels a little counterproductive, right? Because like the people spend so much time thinking about the framework instead of actually thinking about doing the work, which, your output is actually what matters. The framework itself is like, whatever works for you. What's your take on that? Like, where do you see the value of these predefined frameworks in a career of a product manager?
I can definitely see the both angle. I think if I were to take a step back, right, framework is sort of a means to an end. Let's think about what is the job to be done that people hire framework to do. So if I were to take a step back, I think the benefits of using a framework is because a lot of times the problem we're trying to solve with our product are very complex, right? For example, a good example at work is like, hey, if we want to customize LinkedIn and make this global product more relevant for different type of segments, how do you decide which segments to prioritize? Well, there's probably 10 or 15 factors you can look into play, right? You can look at engagement play, revenue play, how easy it is to do from an engineering standpoint, how easy it is to go to market from a sales standpoint. And then there's strategic insights around a certain market. Maybe it's not as mature, but you want to go there. So it's a very messy problem space. And when things are messy, people tend to don't know what to react, especially even if you are very clear as a product manager, your cross-functionals aren't spending as much time in that MySpace as you, right? So you need a quick way to kind of tell their story, catch their attention, get people on board in a very structured way. So you're trying to put structure to a very ambiguous, kind of messy problem. I think that's why people wanted to fall back into a framework, and especially for framework that's been recognized, in the past by like a thought leader or tested and proven. It's kind of a shortcut, a mental shortcut to like get credibility or just help people all of a sudden build a mental model around a problem, right? So I think that's why we hire a framework to do. So then with that in mind, I think the best part to apply a framework or come up with your own is deep understanding the problem space very deeply, and then figure out, okay, do I create my own framework to make structure make sense of it that helps me communicate that problem and size and thinking through that problem to my stakeholder, or do I just fit that into an existing framework? I think it also helps in the reverse workflow as well. Let's just say, oh, this problem is so messy. How can I get started? Right? If you're a new BPM, for example, maybe it's a new space, you don't even know how to put structure on it. So having some proven framework to help you test, does it make sense to be like cookie cutter putting that on top of it? So it helps you to think through, and again, coming back to critical thinking and creative problem solving, I think AI can play a role here too, which is like, hey, I'm thinking through this solution. Help me apply, this framework to solve that problem. And then as a follow-up prompt, you can say, well, what are some loopholes in this framework that we're not thinking about? So, instead of, I think, thinking framework is a black and white, I think there's like different shades of grays that you should probably operating in, right? Like you can go, let's set aside framework. Just think about how I would come up with my own thing. Oh, it's very messy. It's very hard. I'm hitting a writer's block or like a thinker's block. Then let's try to help AI to help us figure out the divergent thinking before we can converge, right? Earlier that we mentioned about that two triangle. So then ask AI to apply that framework, and then ask it to debate among itself of like, what else is the framework not thinking about? Sometimes I would put it in the prompt and say, give me 10 things. So then I want the AI to think hard for me, right? The things that like 5 of the 10 usually doesn't make sense, but there's like usually 2 or 3 that are pretty good. So you just kind of have to like dance with it a little bit and then use framework to your own advantage to help you refine your thinking. That's the first job we're hiring you to do. Second is create a better mental model to help you convey an idea, a problem, a solution better in a more structured way.
The key insight here too is that the misconception that a lot of folks have is that frameworks are this static thing, right? Like somebody wrote a blog post about this, I have to follow the device to the letter because that's the framework, and then they hit a wall because it doesn't work and they think, well, the framework doesn't work. And the reality is a little bit more mushy in that you can actually tweak the framework to what you actually needed to do, right? Like if you're building a specific kind of product, addressing a specific market, just because the framework is established in a certain way doesn't mean that you cannot add, so let's say, like flavor to it based on your own needs, your own expectations. It's not this set in stone thing that is, it's not hard science. I want to put it this way.
Yeah, I think that sums up really well. Yes. It's fluid.
Speaking of frameworks, from your own experience, have you ever had any cases where you had to say, you know what, like conventional wisdom doesn't work, we have to do something else? And what was that? What would be a good example in the product space?
I think principally what I would think about it is that a lot of times if you want to differentiate yourself, or if you want to, let's say, for example, if you are a pivoter that you wanted to break into product, which is a very complex space right now, right? A lot of people are asking, well, it's a chicken and egg. How do you break into product without product experience, right? Like, and then so I think that's where conventional wisdom might not work. Conventional wisdom asks you to get some product experience before you can gain one. So some of the, people that I coach in the past, how they fight that was, how can you think different? Sometimes it's like go big or go home, right? Like you have to like just try something different. So some example, for example, one person wanted to interview for TikTok. So he just kind of recorded like a TikTok video of a resume, right? And that's much more engaging than, a paper that just looks like everyone else and you don't even have a, like a product experience to put on your resume. So that's one quick example of thinking differently. I think if you're trying to grow, especially in a very, competitive space, you should also think about what are some of the growth hacks that are different from someone else that can help you to grow. Like good example was Uber in the early days. I think what they did with like Uber Kitties, Uber ice cream, that was the summer when I arrived San Francisco. I thought it creates that buzz. Sure, you can argue, oh, those don't sustain, but it achieves the purpose of like testing some of the levers locally, learn how those gimmicky things might work, might not work, right? Like creating different just mechanism to be creative so that you're different from everyone else. I think that part is where conventional wisdom will fall short. And with AI, that come in more and more handy, to think about just creative problem solving, not using the traditional way, to help you kind of stand out, be different, and etc.
Well, Shyvee, it's been wonderful talking to you, but before we wrap up, I want to ask one question, and that is the question that I ask of all my guests, and that is, if you think about a piece of unconventional advice that you would give somebody that listens to the show and says, yep, I made a decision. I want to do PM and I want to become a great PM. What's a piece of unconventional advice? Something that you'd say is not commonly recognized, not commonly shared, anything like that.
I actually have two pieces of advice can I give.
Or let's go to
controversial, by the way, controversial. The first one, that's controversial. So I love doing this exercise called, basically it's a 2x2 metrics of your passion versus your competence. So something you're, let's say, not passionate and not competent, audit your day. If you're doing a lot of that, like the plumbing work that we talk about, lower value, make sure you delegate or don't do that work, or use AI to automate as much as possible. Something you're very passionate about but not very competent, like cooking for me. I cook okay, but I would never be a professional chef, probably. That's your passion. That's your hobbies, right? But something you are really good at, not necessarily super passionate. Here's your competence zone. And it's also your danger zone. Here's what's controversial or slightly contradictory, is that your employer or manager tend to keep you in that zone because you're so good at it. That's also where you keep yourself in that zone because it's comfortable. You're good at it. Like while I was making PowerPoint slide, right? That's why it took me a few years to break through that, to go to your next zone, which is your zone of genius. Something you're passionate and something you're good at. The earlier you find out what are the kind of things and activities, tasks, things that you love to do in that zone, do more of it. Craft your job in such way to do more of it. That's where you can break through and find like career joins and life meanings and all of that goodness. So that's number one piece. Number two piece, I come back, it's related to that. Lots and lots of people want to come to me these days wanted to become a PM. A lot of times I ask them why. And I'm going to say, again, a very controversial wisdom is that PM is often a means to an end. A lot of times you don't have to be a PM to do the things that you enjoy. That's why it's very important that you do that task to know what things are in your zone of genius. Maybe there's a certain type of work, like a UX researcher or maybe product marketing, that's a better fit than you're pigeonholing yourself. I only want a product management job, like no matter what, right? So be open-minded to what career embrace you and how can you create those opportunities to do more of it. Because I've seen a lot of if you're early in your career, by no means try to break into PM. But I've seen a lot of people who are mid-career, maybe with 10 or 15 years of experience. They do not want to go back down to like a junior PM, but then without that, you cannot really lead a big PM team. So there's a lot of trade-off, a lot of discussion, what to do. I think do the exercise first. Don't just think I want to be a PM, but think about what kind of things within PM or within your job or within your life that you enjoy doing. And then reverse engineer, like what kind of jobs will give you more opportunity to do that. Maybe it's PM, maybe it's PM adjacent roles. So then you can create more opportunity and more joy for yourself versus just like thinking about PM. So that's my parting advice for folks.
Wonderful advice. Shyvee, thank you again so much for being here. And for folks that want to learn more about what you're building, maybe there's projects you want to share, where could they go?
So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I try to keep up as much active as I could. Work has been pretty busy, but yeah, follow me on LinkedIn. Once you visit my LinkedIn profile, you'll see that I have a series similar to this podcast where I also get to interview product leaders called the Product Management PM Learning Series. So most of the Fridays, I do a live show with a guest. And recently, I also created a sub series within that broader series, focusing on case studies around building generative AI products. So, yeah, I'd love to, if you could follow me, reach out on LinkedIn and send me questions. I'll try my best to respond.
Excellent. And we'll have links in the show notes, so folks don't need to necessarily Google for it. They can just click on a link in the description or in a blog post, wherever, or in the podcast app, wherever you're listening to this. Shyvee, thank you so much for being here today. It's been great.
No, thank you for having me. I enjoyed our conversation. Hope your audience learn as much as we do and enjoy it as well.